Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, public comments. Nobody has approached either of us relative to public comments, so we'll move on to the minutes from the June 24th meeting, which were in the packet. What are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Lemmer to approve, seconded by Chair Gibbs. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Supervisor Jensen has indicated that he had something come up at work and he will not be able to attend. But we have a quorum present. Operational items for discussion and possible action, discussion of the 2026 annual budget development and policy recommendations from the committee, including review of mandatory discretionary program document and discussions of rates and fees. I think we tag team this. If you want to start off, Administrator Leonard.
Sure, and I apologize if it sounds repetitive or if I miss things. It could go either way. This is the second meeting today where we've given this presentation, but building on the budget orientation and kickoff meeting, each of the standing committees is going to have this on as a recurring agenda item throughout the budget process. It really does allow for, I hope, conversation and direction from the standing committees to staff in how to build the budget before it goes to the county board. Again, as Chair Robinson will reference more, there's really multiple stages of the budget. The first is that budget building responsibility that lies with my role by statute. That said, I really appreciate when I get some clear direction on what those priorities are in the budget. So it's the opportunity for standing committees to have those conversations. It also lends itself well to direction to this committee once this committee approves that or receives that budget, I should say. And then also during the final budget adoption process that during the board's full consideration of the budget. Again, the three policy questions that we try to provide information from the staff perspective to the policymakers. The three questions that we provide that information relative to are first and foremost, what programs or services do you want us to provide within the limits afforded under state statute? And that is really why within your packet there is that mandatory and discretionary program document. So it's a high-level document. It's accurate. It's probably not precise in terms of really getting down to a granular level, but I think it's a real helpful tool that we've implemented the last couple of years to provide that insight. The second policy question that, of course, we talked about during the budget orientation and kickoff is at what level of service do you want us to provide those services and programs? Again, that behooves itself to a conversation. I hope it's interactive for the programs and services that you're interested in. It gets to things like quality measures. The best example, the example that I've used a number of times in other committees is the board has been very clear to the highway department and to administration that the goal that the county board has for the quality of our highway system is to maintain an average pacer rating of 7 on our roadways. Great guidance in terms of how to build that budget, because of course you could say, hey, we want to maintain an average pacer rating of 9. That would fundamentally drive us to build a budget that has a much greater investment in terms of staff time and dollars. Or you could say, hey, we want to have a average pacer rating of perhaps 5, which would again look fundamentally different. And we could have a conversation about, we'd have to bring information back to you. That would be an iterative conversation that was discussed this morning at the infrastructure committee. But that's one area. Again, level of service can be quality, it can be timeliness. So for programs that rely upon permits, perhaps you want our processing time to be quicker based on your conversations with constituents. That would require an investment of staff time or some other investment. We're always trying to be as efficient as possible, of course, but that's that second question, that second policy question of what level of service. Lastly, the third question, is at what cost do you want us to provide the services? Again, that is governed in some significant form by state statute. There are certain programs we can't charge fees for, or if we can, they are set by state statute. But for the balance of the programs that we do have flexibility regarding fees for service, I think this is another area where we've really improved the budget over the last several years to be more transparent. We've included, last year was, we included an appendix of all of the rates and fees for the programs and services where we do charge fees. Again, that's a policy question for the board. That is not it's not something staff should be doing. We will bring recommendations, bring you information, but ultimately that's a decision for the board, because at its core, as Chair Robinson referenced in the budget orientation meeting, if we're not fully recovering our costs to deliver those services, effectively what we're doing, what the county board is deciding to do is to subsidize that service with what we'll call general tax, whether that's tax levy, sales tax, or some other form of revenue other than fees for service. So those are the three primary policy questions that this process is really intended to assist the board and the committees in providing direction to staff. I'll give one example of that last fee discussion. If you're not aware, at the most recent Environmental Resources Committee, really, from my perspective, very positive, productive discussion relative to our personal on-site wastewater treatment system program. We have a program that deals with the implementation or installation of those services, and then we have a program that is responsible for the ongoing maintenance, where we monitor ongoing maintenance. That is a mandatory program, but we do have the flexibility to charge fees. We have been charging fees relative to our initial inspections of new systems to generate revenue to offset the cost of that work, but we historically had not implemented a maintenance fee to fund our maintenance program. That was one of the areas we looked at last year to have discussion, and the Environmental Resources Committee elected to take that up this year in connection with budget discussions. They had that discussion, and again, just for background, if you live in an area where you are within a sewerage district or a water district, the fees you pay to those districts cover that cost. But if you live outside of one of those districts and you have an on-site system, your maintenance, the maintenance program that the county oversees pursuant to state statute, effectively was being paid through tax levy. So the Environmental Resources Committee had a discussion. Staff presented some options relative to cost recovery and fee implementation, and ultimately, after, again, what I thought was productive discussion, that committee gave direction to move forward with developing a fee structure that effectively covered the entire cost of that maintenance program through the implementation of what would effectively be a $6 fee that would be charged to, again, the population that's served by that program. So another good example of the standing committees providing that direction to staff, and ultimately we're going to do some work to see how that can be incorporated. Whether it can be incorporated into this year's budget or next year's budget is really a legal question we need to do some work on. But I just bring that up as illustrative of that third policy question. And I'll kick it back to you, Mr. Chair, for what you have.
Thank you. So this is part of the ongoing effort to expand the county board committees and members' participation in the development of the budget. And we kicked that off with Budget 101, and we've been doing that for a couple of years, and we will continue that with the adoption of budget assumptions and priorities later in this meeting for the county board to act on. But we're really looking at identification of what the priorities are in terms of programs and in terms of level of services, and how do we go about funding those through fees and others. And again, there are two opportunities for this committee and the board to engage in formation of the budget. One is through the committees between now and September, when the administrator is developing the budget. At the end of September, he He presents it, and then it becomes the county board's agenda. And this committee will take it in early October, have meetings, and we'll set the tax rate for publication, and then we will have a public hearing, and then make additional recommendations to the county board for changes that will be taken up and voted on in November. As we look at the budget, one of the options is for new programming or expansion of programs. Understanding that there are limited resources, we would need to identify what the funding sources are in whether we're reallocating dollars or looking at fees or other sources to do that. And again, not all dollars are the same. We have approximately a $200 million budget, of which $55 million comes from the levy. The other 145 million comes from other sources, including sales tax, fees, intergovernmental transfers, the grants we receive. But if we're looking at cuts, you need to be cognizant of what you're trying to cut. If you're trying to cut the levy, then you need to look at those that are funded off the levy versus those that are funded through fees. And again, reiterating that fees are an important part of our budget. And while we don't have many fees under the purview of this committee, there are a limited number of them. It's important that we look at those fees to keep pace with inflation, because if we don't, we lose ground and we have to make up the cost. If we give a 4% raise and we don't raise the fees, we've shifted that to other sources of funding, and that could result in cuts or impacts to other programs. So we need to make sure that we're reviewing the fees on a regular basis, and when appropriate, making recommendations for changes. We have within our purview, Corporation Counsel, the Treasurer's Office, Clerk, Register of Deeds, Facilities and Maintenance, Human Resources, and Finance. And we look at the insurance benefits and other things as we move forward. So those would be the areas that we'll be focusing on. If members have concerns about items that are under the purview of another committee, I encourage you to go to those committees and make recommendations and suggestions on how we might change those. One of the things that we're working on is our fund balance policy, and we'll be talking about that later today. I think it's important for us to communicate that in addition to the assumptions and priorities to the county board so that they have an understanding of where we are. And later this month, we will have the 2024 audit presented to us by Baker Tilly that will tell us where we are with the various fund balances and what opportunities there are for the KIP, the Capital Improvement Program, not next year, but the year after that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last piece I'll end with is I referenced the mandatory discretionary program document. If you have specific questions about programs or services you want to hear more about, please communicate those to the chair. Certainly, we have department heads here and staff who are very, very knowledgeable. However, if they're anything like me, I much prefer an open book and take-home exam to a pop quiz. So we'll try to do our best to answer questions on the fly, and certainly if you have them, please ask. But if you do know you want to take up a certain program at a later date, please communicate that to the chair, and we'll make sure we can bring as much information to you as possible to help you really address those three policy questions.
So are there any questions or comments from the committee members? Supervisor Marshall, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the discretionary programs, would it be possible to get number of FTEs, full-time equivalents that we have dedicated to that? And if there's any significant contract services, just so we can put a dollar amount to the program?
Sure, that's a great question. A similar question came up this morning at infrastructure. And I referenced the way that counties budget. And for those of you that have been on the board for a while, you'll recall we had a discussion about what kind of you allude to as program-based budgeting. Counties in Wisconsin, I'm not aware of another county that actually does program-based budgeting. And if you're looking for a better explanation than what I'm going to give, in the Wisconsin Counties Handbook, They have a section devoted to explaining what the various types of budgeting, what those are, how line item budgeting is different than program-based budgeting. We are going to work based on the conversation that Sam and I just had, based on the question that came from infrastructure, to try to get information on, can we roll up the various funding streams for programs? But in light of the fact that we do that line item budgeting, we don't allocate staff to necessarily the same programs that are on that list. Those programs and services on that list fall within general line items. So the best example I can give is within social services. There are a lot of programs and services that are listed that are strategies under a larger umbrella of programs. So Child Protective Services and our out-of-home care budget is a big line item. We don't necessarily always budget for, hey, this is going to be the individual things that you'll see underneath. Another example would be the health department, and I can pull this up because I used this one this morning. Within the rates and fees document, there are rates and fees that correspond to the various permits and licenses that we issue for retail food, and they are stratified based on the size of the and service level of the entity that's requesting the permit. We don't allocate staff at that level, that granular level. So what Sam and I are going to talk about is, can we roll up funding streams to try to get at that? But I don't know that we have a great way on the level of granularity that's within the mandatory discretionary fee document to talk about FTE allocation, if that answers your question.
Yeah, like your department, under justice systems, there's 5 different activities. None of them are discretionary. How many people do you have associated with that justice systems?
So I think that's going to get at what our activity is going to get at your question. The short answer is we have one, that's a great example. We have one FTE, but we contract for services for all of those other ancillary services under the justice system. So this isn't developed yet. Sam and I just met this afternoon on it. But we'll roll up a funding stream and an expense categorization that'll show personnel. It'll show contractual services, so you can get some insight on that. I think that's the best we can do, but we'll do our best to get at that.
So I'd like to just throw out a couple of items for discussion. One deals with our energy costs, and I know that this has been an ongoing point of discussion, and we'll get into our priorities and assumptions relative to where that is, but I really would like to see us reduce our kilowatt and therm consumption and therefore manage our costs. And part of that would be based upon reduction in facilities, looking at Thomas Street, River Drive, and potentially parts of the university. But I still would like to see us driving the usage of kilowatts and therms down on a degree day basis so that we can, on a long-term basis, realize some savings. And as part of that would be, how aggressive are we with focus on energy and other programs that are available for us to reduce it. But I would hope that we would continue to look at that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The second area that I'd like to see us focus in, and it deals with all departments, but I think it gets into some of the finance operations, deals with our procurement policies. It's my understanding that we have a hodgepodge of people administering procurement, and with the responsibility being with the department heads, but I think that there are some real opportunities for us to realize savings through comprehensive, consolidated approach relative to things like cell phone purchases and other things. And I would look for us to look at our procurement policy and make sure that we've got some reviews. I know the city of Wausau requires that the finance director, I believe the finance director and the city attorney sign off on all contracts. I would hope that we would look at a similar review and approval process going forward to make sure we're consistent with our own policies, that we're looking for the best deal. We've got all these opportunities to realize cost savings through National Association of Councils Minnesota Parks. I know that Jamie has proposed that before. There are all sorts of consortiums where we can look for savings, and I would hope that we would maximize the use of those when it comes for procurement of goods and services going forward. And if we can, as we're looking at the budget, look at our policies and making sure we've got the adequate review and that the people are looking at it and any opportunities to realize those savings are realized.
I can, if I can add, I think that's a great opportunity. We have had a number of meetings recently on some opportunities from the internal services perspective. And I know Supervisor Marshall brought that up, the idea of procurement, a procurement officer a number of years ago. My perspective is, I think Corp Council and I talked this morning, or maybe it was this afternoon, about we really need to do that. And we have, the world is moving to a place where you're needing to procure more and more things and procure them differently. A simple example is a lot of the equipment we had historically purchased is now moving similar to the IT approach. They're moving to more subscription as a service or a lease approach, which is challenging. We'll talk more about an RFP later today where we have a lot of experience in facilities as to how to do an RFP. I think we're really good. I think we have more opportunity for improvement relative to requests for proposals and contracts throughout the organization, and our procurement rules, I think, are a bit antiquated. We've updated them in a lot of respects in terms of thresholds, but to Chair Robinson's point, it's still decentralized in that departments have individual procurement officers, and there's no requirement under our rules for things to funnel through that approach where finance, legal, and administration have that kind of that touch point. And I think that's an opportunity because if you miss, and I know Mike had to step out, but on the legal end, if your RFP is completed and then you give the draft contract to Corporation Counsel for review, you've really missed the opportunity to put all of that stuff you need in your RFP. That's where it should be. And Mike doesn't have capacity to review all those timely either. So I think there's an opportunity there. I hope to have a bit of a proposal for this committee to look at in terms of how to utilize existing funding within the administration budget. I don't have that fleshed out yet, but I think it's moving towards what Supervisor Marshall advocated for a couple of years ago, which is that centralized procurement, or at least a procurement officer to assist other departments.
I would request that the department has, the clerk has some fees relative to the elections. Are we covering our costs? Are those fixed? And looking at those, we have some in the treasurer's office relative to tax reports. Are we covering our costs relative to some of those? And then the register of deeds, I think some of those are statutorily based, but again, if we've got an opportunity to review those fees, if postage goes up, are we collecting our costs associated with it? And I need to go back. I may have said that Supervisor Jensen wasn't here, but it was Supervisor Reynolds that is excused. So if I said that, I apologize and correct the record. Are there other areas that you would like to see us look at? I think we'll spend some time looking at some of the insurance provisions going forward and have a discussion on that. There's a significant increase coming on the property and casualty side of things, and are there some opportunities for us to look at that? But are there some other areas that, as we work our way through the budget between now and September, we can provide guidance to the administrator and beyond that to the board? Scott, Supervisor Poole. You can just move that microphone, or
Well,
move a microphone over to
Yeah, they don't like to move them. But just thinking this may not be totally in alignment with this, but if you remember, of course, last budget, at the end, there was a resolution to make sure that property taxes weren't raised. It kept neutral. At the time, it was said it would be good to, if that's an idea, to get that up front so it doesn't come at the last minute. I'm kind of myself, I'd like to see a priority of keeping those property taxes neutral again. I haven't polled the rest of the board, but the sentiment seemed pretty strong last year, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's, again, this year, the sentiment. I know that cost of living for people and, the uncertainties, I think it would make sense of just going forward. I think maybe keep that in mind.
Can I ask for clarification? What does that mean? Is it the mill rate is,
The levy, not the mill rate, I mean, just the overall taxes. We did not raise any taxes last year, property taxes on the levy, correct?
is that utilizing the full value of the net new construction? Or are you saying that we freeze the levy at this year's rate?
I don't know those details for sure at this point, but I know we did not. However, we got to the point of not raising property taxes on people last year. That's where I think a priority should be again this year.
Okay.
And how we get there, I guess we can figure it out.
We'll look for embellishment as we go through the process.
Okay.
Other issues, and we'll talk a little bit later in today's meeting about some of the impacts from outside sources and our priorities. All right, we will move on then to budget assumptions and priorities, and I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard. He has provided you with proposals and some fill-in-the-blank opportunities as we have this discussion.
Thank you, and big thanks to staff. Sam and I have met on a number of these. Molly and I have talked about a couple as well. And some of these I would say are, we call them, historically, we've called them budget assumptions. A lot of them are, I shouldn't say a lot, a number of them are fixed. We know that what the numbers are going to be. Some others that I'll highlight are really opportunities for you to give insight as to how risk averse do you want to be as we build that budget. So I'll just talk through these at a high level, and if you have any questions, certainly ask, and Sam will answer any of the hard questions. So starting with net new construction, right at the top, this is on page 69 of the packet. So again, net new construction is that calculation whereby the Department of Revenue provides us what the additional new money is going to be for us to collect through the property tax collection. We have the historical rates here. It's driven by, again, what it sounds like, new construction throughout the county. Of course, the apportionment is different than that total net new construction money, but I won't delve into the TIF impact, so we'll just talk net new construction at high level. So my sense is that 1.75 is a good placeholder now for budgeting purposes. We actually will get a firm number during the budget process. We'll get an estimate from the Department of Revenue probably in the next 30 days. Sam? August 1st, thank you. And then we'll get a final number, but 1.75, again, based on historical information there, I think is a good place to start. In terms of sales tax, the last 2 years, you have budgeted $16 million for purposes of budgeting in terms of what was going to come in through sales tax. You're projected to, of course, bring in more than that. This is that area within your past practice where you do pretty conservatively budget sales tax. It is part of that fund balance strategy that we'll talk about later. My initial thought is, because I know we're going to have budget pressures that I'll talk about later in terms of compensation and other costs, that we should up that a bit. My recommendation for budgeting purposes is $16.3 million. In terms of shared revenue, this is a hard number. It's based on the updated shared revenue law that happened last term. So we know that we should be looking at about a 4.9% increase in shared revenue, equating to new money of about $261,000. The utility tax is a function of the ad valorem tax based on megawatt production that we receive based on the Weston Power Plant. The recommendation and talking with Sam, keep that flat. Again, we will know what that firm number is, and we receive those payments in in November of each year. So the recommendation is that $2.17 million. Transportation aids, this is an area that Chair Robinson has talked about. He talked about it extensively in the Budget 101. That really is dependent not only on the state budget, but it's also dependent on our county spending, our rolling average. It says rolling 5, and it should be rolling 6, but rolling 6-year average. And it also depends on what other counties spend. So the longstanding practice for the county has been to be relatively conservative there. In terms of intergovernmental charges, we projected a slight increase. I want to make clear that that's a budget. It truly is a budgeting assumption. When we have intergovernmental charges, the best example is the highway department. The state is very clear on what you're allowed to charge for, and Commissioner Griesbach referenced this morning. We have equipment that has a rate that if we use a piece of equipment, the state will pay the rate. There's an hourly rate for that equipment usage. We have a staff cost that we can bill to the state. We maximize the amount we can bill legally to the state of Wisconsin based on their rules. So just want to make clear that during the year, we do maximize those intergovernmental charges as permitted. Fines and licenses, in talking with Sam, we held that flat. There was a lot of discussion about court funding in the, in the state budget, and I know counties were hopeful that we were going to see a very significant increase and better cost sharing on courts. But the fines and licenses are, again, a function of not only how many people are going through court for the areas where we have those fines, but also licenses are based on license applications. So last year we had a budgeted 1%. Our thought this year is to hold that flat. I don't know if there's any elaboration you wanted to add on that one, Sam.
Yeah, I looked at 23, 24, and 25, and so far we haven't met the budget in those years, so I felt it probably more beneficial to keep it flat.
All right, thank you. Relative to public charges, you see that I put a highlighted X there, and I'll talk about that in connection with the salaries and wages expenditure assumption in just a minute. Miscellaneous revenues, again, this is an area where Sam did a bit of evaluation and looked at what our current experience is, and that's the reason we upped that a little bit. Anything you want to add on that one? Okay. The ARPA line from your last year's document, we of course redline that out because you've allocated the balance of those ARPA funds, so you don't have that kind of money to allocate through the budget to new projects. Then the last one, which we added last year as part of the budget process, was that conduit bonding revenue through your loan to Bug Tussle. We know what that actual dollar amount is. Sam looked at that, and we put that 100,000 in there. So those are that's the revenue assumption side. Again, a lot of those are, a number of them are hard numbers that we will know as we get closer through the budget. Transportation aids is one of those that we're going to build the budget right now with unless you provide different direction and the board provides different direction, around a flat projection. But we will get a transportation aid number as we progress through the budget process. It generally comes late, but that number will become more firm. Moving on to the expenditure assumptions. These have been the expenditure assumptions historically that this committee and the county board have looked at. Salaries and wages, you'll recall that as part of the administration work plan and the budget actually from last year, I should say the budget that we're currently in, this year's budget, you directed that staff move forward with reevaluating our compensation, our salary compensation plan and our grid. We're in the midst of that. It shouldn't be surprising to anyone if you think back, the last time we implemented our salary plan was we used early 2022 data in working with our consultant. We implemented that as part of the 2023 budget, and we have not moved the grid 23, 24, 25. If you think about the changes in, I'll pick on equalized value the equalized value increases, housing costs increases, the other general inflation over those years, as Supervisor Poole referenced, there's been a lot of pressure. The same is true on wages. Our initial numbers from our consultant relative to the compensation grid shift that's required to get us more in line with market is that the minimums and corresponding other measuring points of that scale need to move to about 10%. So we're working to get a better handle on what those specific numbers are gonna be. Now, those specific numbers relative to actual compensation increases are gonna be driven by, again, a couple of policy questions that this board is gonna, or this committee is gonna have to answer that we'll present to you in the near future. Things related to how do you wanna benchmark? Do you want us to benchmark at the 50th percentile relative to market? Do you wanna mirror the market? Or do you want to be perhaps ahead of that market, 55th percentile, 60th percentile? We're working to get those costings to you. We'll bring those in the future, but that's going to require a significant investment. And I know staff, in speaking with department heads, and I'll talk about this later, it is having an impact. We know we need to move the scale, and I'll talk about that later in my presentation about workplace policies. Molly brought it up in her last presentation to this group when we talked about retention and some of the early turnover we've had. So that's going to require investment. We'll bring you back better numbers. Not going to throw out numbers because that'll serve as an anchor and then people will grab onto that, but we'll come back with better numbers in the future, the very near future. Health insurance. In speaking with Molly, market's looking like 8 to 10%. We put a 6.5 in for health insurance increase. That's consistent with where we ended up and what we put in the budget for 2025. Of course, we're hopeful that we'll see some good experience there, but our actual experience, we've had a couple of challenging months with experience. So. Of course, health insurance is one of those big cost drivers. I can share that our colleagues from Portage County, in speaking with Chris, he certainly still has very strong ties to Portage County. Their initial increase rate quote came back at 27%. So health insurance is challenging. I think we've done a lot of good things with our on-site clinic and others that we're hopeful will benefit us, but a big area of the county budget. WRS, this is an area where we actually know the number. Sam put together a nice calculation on what that overall increase looks like it's weighted based on our employee counts. The Employee Trust Fund did put out their annual increase numbers, so we're looking at a 0.25%, and this is at the bottom of this page. 0.25% increase from 6.95 to 7.20 for general employees and for protective jailers with Social Security, and a 0.25% decrease on the protective with Social Security side. So that weighted calculation is about a 2.08% increase. Dental we held our assumption at 3%, which again has been consistent over past years. Workers' compensation, we put, again, it's based on a blended rate. Not all departments are equal in that regard, but approximately 2% is when you look at what that blended rate has looked like. Unemployment, we had 0% as our estimate in 2025, and that was a function of the fact that we had a credit or a balance in that area for a number of years, as we had, like many counties and other entities during the pandemic. We had fraudulent claims that were made that ultimately then you are credited with that amount to be used in the future. So we've worked through most of that balance and that credit, but we put in a moderate increase of 1%. Insurance, other insurance. Chair Robinson referenced this. Corporation Counsel's Office, Jamie, who's in the back, gave us these numbers from our insurers. And we're looking at approximately about $100,000 across all those other forms of insurance, which when you look at that rate is about a 16.5% increase. And then lastly, on the utility cost side, I don't know if Chris is on. I know he's traveling today, but this is an area where there's just a lot of uncertainty relative to utility costs. I think staff certainly are striving to look at opportunities to divest those buildings and bring those. I hope to have some requests for proposals for you relative first to the Thomas Street building, working with the credit union I'm hopeful that they're going to close on their future site and be able to vacate that space. But utility costs, the rate case increases that WPS was putting forward with between utility, electric and gas were low 4% and upper 4% respectively on those. Of course, there were changes with recent federal legislation that some of the information we've gotten from the National Association of Counties and others is that legislation may have an impact on utilities, that they may seek to increase rates to pass along costs. But really, I don't have a great crystal ball to tell you what to put in here. This is an area, another one of those areas where how risk averse or how risky do you want to be? At the end of the day, if we have a really good winter, we'll be in a good spot. And by good winter, I mean warm one, not cold. But I left that open for discussion with this committee so that you could essentially tell us what you want to do. I mean, our experience will be driven by the weather and the rates that we're charged. And Kim, Chris isn't on, isn't he? Okay. All right, I know that was a lot and that was fast, but happy to answer any questions you might have on those initial numbers.
As it relates to the salaries and wages line, when are we dealing with that now? We need to get something to the county board. I think we've got this meeting and potentially next meeting to finalize that and take it to the board. But it would be nice to begin to set those in. And then I would also ask relative to the other insurance, have we looked at our deductibles and our stop loss insurance as a way of managing our exposure and therefore our premiums going forward? That's a very healthy increase in our costs.
Yes, I think there's still. Yes, I think they are still looking into that. A lot of this is dependent on our appraisal that happened in April, and they're still working through the numbers on that. So I'm hoping to get a more definitive estimate within the next, hopefully, month.
So is it based upon insured value or our risk experience?
Insured value.
But that's based on risk?
No, it's.
Historic risk or not? So you think that there's been a significant increase in our valuation? Were we under-reporting?
No, it's based on the inflation and the value of lumber and the value of all of the rest of the country's value of everything increasing. We had quite a extensive appraisal done, and a lot of our county property value increased.
I would put that in the same boat as when I referenced equalized value before, right? The replacement value of our buildings,
Increased, correct.
if something were to happen, it would cost more money to replace the buildings that we have, which I think anecdotally we all can understand and appreciate.
I believe he said it was an 18% increase.
So are there some strategies that we can use to,
Yes, that's what MPIC is, our property insurance is working on right now, is trying to come up with a way that doesn't increase our premiums as much. He explained it to me how they work together to make that less
so
detrimental.
16% seems high.
At 18%, yes, I believe it was.
Other committee members? Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Is it possible to get those buildings that we intend to sell or repurpose, like a breakout of those? Because if we get rid of River Drive, Thomas Street, perhaps our 18% could be less.
Yes, I believe I did send a memo out to,
Yeah, until we sell those, my general, like, we have to insure them.
yes.
That was,
Motivating to get rid of them.
yeah, yep. I don't
And
know,
the
Jamie-
utility cost.
Yeah, utilities, holding costs, all those things certainly are important. Again, this is more information than perhaps you're looking for, but Thomas Street is the first building that we can divest ourselves of. River Drive, we're entirely out of. However, based on IT infrastructure, we need to have changes made within, we can't get rid of River Drive before we get rid of Thomas Street. Jerry can give you more of an explanation on why, but that's why, to your point, the motivation with the credit union to really work with them to help them find a new home. I spoke with Chair Robinson about this. I mean, I check in with them very frequently. My hope is that they are able to close based on the last communication I had in August on their future site, and I'll report back. But I think you're right. I mean, part of the strategy is if you have less buildings to insure, your costs should go down.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know when we look at health insurance, we at least use a consultant to go out and review what the markets are doing. And have we done anything as far as solicit bids on our property and casualty to test whether or not our current provider is giving us, quality and beneficial pricing?
Short answer, no. We haven't gone out to bid on that, and I don't remember going out to bid on that even before I was the deputy. I don't know if anyone in the room can recall.
Is there a reason why we shouldn't? I mean, is there something that we could do that potentially see whether the market, whether there's additional opportunities?
I don't know, Jamie, if you have a perspective on that.
I know it's a lot of work. I totally get that it's a lot of work because you've got to look at every property and all of that stuff. But I think when we're looking at $100,000 increase, in cost, and we haven't tested the market, I think it's an opportunity to look at.
I can definitely, I think what I could recommend is having our insurance broker maybe speak on that. He administers our MPIC policy, pretty much everything except for our liability policy he administers. And he would be able to answer whether or not all of our insurance policies, aside from WMIC, are, within the range of whether they're reasonably priced in comparison to others. When I speak to him, he seems to think that MPIC is within the standards of all other insurance companies in the market, especially municipal markets.
Mike?
Just to add to that, Mr. Chair, I do believe that our insurance broker, who's through Robertson and Ryan, does do some informal testing of the market every time we go out for renewals to see how the renewal amount compares to other market rates. But I think Jamie's suggestion is a good one, to have him present to kind of explain his process to the committee. I'm sure he'd be willing to do that.
So I think, the dilemma that we have is that we're asked to adopt a budget assumption, and we can continue to work on that through the budget process. But what is a realistic number? I personally find that 16% high as a target. And I'd like to see if we can refine that. Can we, between now and our next meeting, perhaps kick the tires a little bit more with the brokers and our advisor and see if that number is not something we can bring down from a target perspective?
Yes, I can discuss. Would you like him to, was it July 22nd, the next, would you like him to come to the next meeting? Or be available by phone or video?
I would like to see something in writing, given the fact that we've got our audit coming in and we've got our fund balance discussion. I think we've got a really full agenda. I don't want to, I'd like to see if there's some opportunities. Understanding we've got the budget process in which we can refine that, but I'm looking at meeting management. I think that the audit presentation is going to be a healthy discussion for a period of time, particularly because of the fund balance aspects of it. So we can do that, but within reason. What are the members' desires, or what would you like to do? Any thoughts? Vice Chair Marshall.
I would like to hear from our broker and understand what his motivation is to get us policies that are decrease rather than increase. So how is he compensated, or Robertson and Ryan? What is the motivation would be great.
Okay. Other thoughts? All right, well, the other blanks that we have in there are public charges, and part of that's tied into the salary and wages and the utility, the wages, salaries, and then the utility costs. I really would like to see us move on some of those buildings, I think, for lots of reasons. We have significant holding costs, and we keep kicking the can down the road, and we've got some vacant facilities we need to, if there's CCIT issues, how do we accelerate the relocation of those, that infrastructure, and if we've got to relocate a tenant, how do we accelerate and facilitate that expansion, but then how do we begin working on transferring or coming up with a long-term solution on those properties. And we also have a discussion coming up relative to the dorm at the university and what the use of that is. But I think that those buildings all have cost to the county, including insurance costs. So if we could, as part of our budget process going forward, develop a comprehensive approach to at least those three facilities and others as the need arises. Does that make sense? I'm seeing it. Supervisor Lemmer.
Yeah. Is it possible to get some data on the numbers of, utility costs on those buildings? Some of them are empty, obviously, and the insurance costs in a chart, just so we can kind of see where it would be optimal to get rid of something quicker?
Sure, I'm sure Chris can pull you utility bills for the standalone facilities we have. We can do that. The dormitory, as was referenced, we can bring you I'm working on that proposal with the entity you directed me to. I'm not sure when they're going to be in a place to have a formal offer for you. Again, the challenge with Thomas Street is we have a tenant that I don't have the ability to kick out without, and they have a lease. So I'll bring back more information at your next meeting to the extent I'm able to communicate when they anticipate being out. And I'll also bring Jerry Klein to talk through some of the logistical challenge with IT, but we certainly can run, I saw Troy nodding before, we can run the give you some preliminary holding costs. They're gonna be accurate, not precise. It'll be utilities. And then, I don't know if we can break down insurance by individual building. Okay, we'll bring those back.
Chair Gibbs.
Well, I think the utility costs, especially on River Drive, is going to be a little bit challenging because they weren't vacant for the whole 2024 year, and they've only been vacant part of the year of 2025. So it might be challenging pulling utility costs for those facilities.
So I'm sensing that we'd like some more information as we look at this. And again, from a perspective of moving forward, the discussion on salaries and wages, do we want to have that now, or I'm sensing we're carrying this issue, the finalization of these assumptions over to the next meeting based upon the discussion that we've had to date. We'll need to get that to the county board that evening. Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I think one of the unknowns that we have is the public charges, and I think that is something that we need to. I mean, last year we budgeted a 3% on the public charges that we could increase. To me, that makes a lot of sense to increase those charges, at least what we're increasing, and I think we tied that to our salary increases last year. The 3% was the same as our salary increase. And to me, those public charges should be increased, basically what our salary increases should be, because effectively, it's really what we do. We deliver services with people. And so those services, if we're going to be charging for them, I think we know that the cost, we can't increase those, or the costs continue to increase, and we need to pass those costs on. If we're tied and we're going to restrict us to net new construction as levy limits have been imposed, I think that makes sense, that at least we recover the cost where we can for the services if we continue to deliver those services. If we want to change the delivery of those services, that's a different question, and then we might be able to decrease those costs if we're going to decrease the level of service or decrease the frequency of those services, which effectively decreases the cost of that service. So to me, I think the public charges need to increase, at least tied to the increase in our compensation.
Supervisor Marshall, or Vice Chair Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would encourage that it would be even more, because compensation is not just salary and wages. Compensation includes the 8% or the 6.5% of our 2024 increase, the 6.5% of health insurance increase last year, and we're looking at another 6.5% increase. So we've been rolling that and not making adjustments for that. So I would argue that the increase needs to be greater than 3%, or greater than whatever the salary and wages increases. Thank you.
Why don't we hold that and set that at the time that we finalize the salary and wages, and then come back and revisit it. But there would be, if your costs go up, you'd be able to capture some of that, because it's 6% not of wages, but 6% of cost. So you're allocating that over other areas, including other budgeted items, so you'll catch some of that, but perhaps not all of it, and we'd have to do a breakdown.
Can I ask a question? If there's any budget assumptions, I appreciate the discussion. This has been helpful. Are there any areas where, like net new construction, they really don't, does anybody have questions or concerns with any other than those that you've talked about already? So you understand kind of what we brought forward in terms of where we got our, where we came up with those estimates. And the last thing I'll say before pausing for questions is, as the chair referenced, these, I think we're one of the few counties that goes through this budget assumption process. It is iterative. Like, you'll have a lot of opportunity. If we get a net new construction number that's fundamentally different, we'll bring that forward and update it, and the budget will be built on the best numbers we have, even if we have to make changes the day before.
All right, we'll come back and revisit that, but when will we, I guess that from a budgeting perspective, I'm still struggling with the salary and wages.
Yeah, I believe our consultant is out this week. Is that right? She's on vacation. So as soon as she's back, we'll work with her to get a date. And then my preference is to, as you referenced before with your conversation with Jamie, is have Milena available for you guys to ask questions and help you understand kind of where our current situation is. And we'll have that presentation as soon as we can get her here virtually, I would assume is how it's going to be.
Okay. Then we'll revisit that later in the month. All right. Decision matrix for budget priorities. So if you want to walk us through that.
Sure, thank you.
And by the way, Supervisor Poole, this would be the area or the opportunity for you to interject new areas. So keep that in mind as we're discussing this.
All right, thank you. This is, again, the process you adopted a couple of years ago that we borrowed with permission from St. Croix County. Although I'll be honest with you, they changed their process after we borrowed this. So they're essentially how this works is you have the areas on the left, which is the guidance that you would prioritize each of these, I'll call them buckets. And the number, how you rank order them, corresponds to a decision matrix that tells me what to do with respect to the budget. In terms of process that we've used, I bring forward recommendations for your consideration, but based on what I see as operational challenges within, or operational needs that we have within the county. So across the areas of reserves, employee compensation, health insurance, new positions, and operational expenses. I'll start with what I think is the area where that we need to prioritize from an operational perspective and also from a budget perspective. I say this every time I get in front of this committee and in front of the board. And I'll talk about it in just a minute again. Employee compensation is an area where we need to make sure we stay competitive. The wage study that we did in 2022, as I referenced before, needs to be updated. There will be consequences if we don't implement it, and there will be consequences based on how we implement it as well, which we'll talk about when Milena comes here. But I put that as number one, to implement that compensation plan, and I think we also have some strategies to use there that hopefully keep us from having to do the periodic or episodic significant changes to that scale that I'll talk through when Milena comes. But I did put that as number one, to essentially implement that compensation plan. And I intend to speak with department heads next week, Friday, at our department head meeting to talk about how we can assist in mitigating some of the costs to do that. Second, as alluded to by the chair, relative to controlling spending and reserves, really utilizing those only as necessary. I ranked it number two because I do anticipate with The update we'll give you a little bit later with the potential relocation of the highway facility and planning for that. I would foresee utilizing highway reserves for that. I don't envision, based on the previous discussion that the board has had and the direction it's given me, that stay away from using reserves. We'll get more information on general reserves during the audit, as was alluded to by Chair Robinson, but I did put that as a priority to use those exceedingly sparingly. Relative to health insurance, I put that as the third priority. It is a significant expense. However, I ranked it third to really capture the fact that we're going to need to make, if we have a significant increase, we're going to need to modify benefits. It'll be a shared lift between us as an employer and employees and how to manage that. I don't think it's feasible to maintain a status quo health plan should we receive a significant renewal quote, and do that utilizing all external non-employee revenues. So I see that being a shared impact. With respect to new positions, I put no net, I ranked it number 4, which you'll see on the kind of guidance what that would mean to me. It was a no net increase in positions. I want to be very clear, however, I've already been speaking with a number of department heads about what positions can they do without, and how can we do things differently. I've had really good conversations with a couple of department heads about better aligning their staff revenue streams with staff work and minimizing impact on levy. Really good conversations with health department leadership about how to do that. And I think we have some opportunities in the environmental health side to make sure we're maximizing our utilization of those environmental health fees, those are user fees that essentially offset the need to have levy involved in that program. And there was a lot of work during last budget cycle to update those fees, so I think there's some opportunity there. But I really don't foresee us having the ability, we don't have the luxury of increasing positions at this point that don't have clear revenue sources. And even then, I would say if there's an opportunity for independent revenues, we should be looking to do that in a way that frees up some levy, quite honestly, hopefully to help us implement that wage study. And then lastly, I think this should not be a surprise to anyone. This last operating expense requests piece from the St. Croix model was essentially a coin flip here, right? One side of the coin is fund all the operating requests that come in from departments or not. Like, don't do that is the other one. And I ranked, we do this every year. We are very fortunate. We have exceedingly strong department heads that are very good in managing their budget. At the same time, they also have really good ideas about if we had more resources, what we could do with them that would really impact our people that we serve. I think everyone realizes we're not going to be able to do all those things that we would like to do if revenues were not kind of in the situation they're in. But that gives you kind of my thought process in putting these together. Again, the idea is based on the methodology that St. Croix previously used. It's really, again, a form of guidance. You give me what you think I should look at in building the budget. And I kind of gave you my thought process and how those should be rank ordered. The idea being, of course, you can't make everything a priority, otherwise nothing is. And at the same time, all those things are important, right? All of the things on the left side are important. But happy to answer any questions on kind of what I was thinking in putting those together, but I tried to give you a high-level view of that.
Well, and is the list inclusive? And, so with that, are there any questions or comments from the committee? Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With some of the changes at the federal level, especially with the requirements to with reporting for Medicaid, social services, health department. I, speak from the ADRC point of view, that's going to be a staff at a spot where there's already backlogs. What's the thought process with that?
Well, that's a great question. So particularly, I interpret your question to talk about our benefit assessments and how frequently the idea at the federal bill changed the timeline. It's no longer an annual evaluation. It needs to happen I think it's every 6 months. We haven't fleshed that out in terms of what that would mean from a workflow standpoint. That primarily impacts social services, as you alluded to. That's within our economic support and income maintenance consortium department. I actually was corresponding with Krista Jensen. She's drafting something for me. I asked her to draft something for me this morning on that. Our health department's in a better spot because we don't bill Medicaid very much within the health department. There are a lot of other health departments throughout the state that do direct service and bill through Medicaid for that. So in speaking with Amanda and her team, we don't anticipate a significant impact there. I'm not sure about the impact on the ADRC side in terms of what that means for levy. However, of course, as you know, the levy allocation from the member counties for the ADRC is set to be flat absent change to that intergovernmental agreement. So where we are right now, I'll report back on social services, but Krista said she was working on that write-up for me. But thankfully, our health department, I don't see being a significant challenge in that regard.
So I'd like to direct you to the information we received from NACO that I sent out. It looks like many of those provisions and administrative burdens will fall in federal fiscal year 2027. So we will have some time to adjust to them. But, you're seeing additional work requirements expansion from 18 to 54 to 64 for both SNAP and for Medicaid, 80-hour work per month work requirements, verification of addresses on a regular basis, additional administrative expense for states or, in Wisconsin's case, counties that administer the program. So there will be some consequences relative to administrative costs for the county, and it looks like many of those will hit in federal fiscal year 2027. Now, understanding that begins in October 1st of next year, we'll have to begin to look at those, but I don't know that we fully understand all of those. I've had conversations with the Director of Social Services, and she feels as if right now they can absorb those, but I don't know that we understand fully all the impacts and ramifications of it. That looks at it from the perspective of our administering the program. It does not look at it from the perspective of how our constituents and residents of the county impacted by those requirements. So that may be a separate discussion, but we're in the context of administration. I think there's a feeling that we can handle it in next fiscal year, but there will be some challenges and increased requirements. There are ties to error rates, so you'll want to get it right. And there are penalties associated with higher, error rates over 6%. So we'll want to make sure that we're providing the necessary staffing and support necessary to comply with those new standards. It's ironic that the states with the worst compliance rates are sort of grandfathered in and given 2 more years to come into compliance, where states that are doing a better job are forced to deal with it in 2027.
Yeah, I can, as soon as Krista gets that done, I can bring that back to, my plan was to bring that to Health and Human Services with Krista, and then we can also report here.
I just think it's kind of a chess game we have to play, because if we're looking at keeping things stable or not expanding or contract and possibly contracting, I'd hate to shoot ourselves in the foot in 2 years paring down, too much. So hopefully there's a good plan for consolidating but not necessarily losing. I don't know.
Yeah, so our goal that's a great point. It's continued process improvement to be as efficient as possible. I mean, the flip side of that coin is we just don't have, you're not going to bring in enough new funding to fund all of to fund any new positions using levy. I just don't see that happening and still maintain and retain the current staff we have based on the initial information we've gotten from our consultant. I just, and as I'll talk about in a minute, I think that's vitally important. Staffing is critical. And realigning staff. I think we've seen some strong benefits and strong outcomes when we are working across department lines, so we'll just have to continue to do that. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. My hope with and some of these relative to social services, and other impacts, North Central Healthcare is a prime example to figure out what the state role, if any, is going to be to kind of step into that gap. If they do have an intent to, I'll pick on UW Extension and the SNAP education program. If the state's gonna step into that, right now, it doesn't look like it. Now, those are not county-funded positions, and they're not positions that we contract for with UW Extension. They're positions that essentially we agree to house through an annual contract that has been approved by and reviewed by Extension Education Economic Development each year to, hey, do we want to continue to provide that program? That's the county's obligation. But should that go away, which it sounds like the funding from the federal government has been removed, the question really becomes, what does that look like? And if that's an area where the county wants, that's a choice, right? If you want to step into that, tell me how and what are we going to stop doing? And I have a couple of thoughts if you, like what that might look like. But it's really incumbent upon the state to right now make a decision whether or not they're going to, in my mind, whether or not they're going to step up and provide that funding.
Any other discussion or comments on the priorities? And again, Supervisor Poole, if your goal is to have a no levy increase on properties, this would be a time to interject that. Would you like to see a potential language along those lines for the next meeting?
I definitely would like to see that. Again, I don't have that fleshed out of how we get there. I'd have to review it again, but in general, in principle, just keeping the property tax level that we had last year, this year would be preferable.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement and see what.
Not that I would challenge or send a challenge to the administrator to do that, I'm sure, but.
Well, again, these are, the budget bill is the county board's document. The administrator facilitates us in the process of assembling it and doing it, but ultimately the budget is, the administrator doesn't vote on it, we do. And so if it is better to have an understanding of what the priorities of the county board are in July than it is on November 12th or whatever day we adopt it. So I think this is an important discussion if we're going to have it, to have early so that we don't have the 11th hour amendments. So we'll have a discussion between now and the next meeting and look and see if we can address that or provide an option for you.
That's why I mentioned it now, to get it in early instead of the last minute again.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I appreciate my colleagues, thought about trying to hold the levy, but I think there's some significant challenges when doing that, and I think some of those have been laid out a little bit by the administrator right now. I think one of the things that we also seen when we did that last year, we used we used some reserves to pay for operating expenses. And the challenge with that is we're using one-time money, which is reserves, to pay ongoing operating expenses. We're going to get into the reserve policy and what that should be, but I caution when we put, there is a way to do that if we want to hold the levy, but that means that we've got to give guidance as to what level of service do we want to reduce, or what programs do we want to reduce? Because I think if we want to, and I think we're going to get into it also about some, the retention challenges that we're having with employees. When I look at one of the things that the administrator handed out, the top 2 factors of why we're losing employees. Dissatisfaction with workload and workload balance, 63% of those leaving identified that. 72% identified pay as being a challenge. So I think we've got to be careful when we put a challenge out that we used last year when we set up the budget. We used a significant amount of reserve to pay for operating expense. And now if we are going to sit there and say we haven't identified any programs that we want to reduce, and I've been at a fair number of the committee meetings, I don't know of any committee that has identified any program to do less of. And in fact, during this year so far, we have added 2 significant costs to the potential building of the budget already. We've used, we've hit up the contingency fund twice, and we've directed the administrator to put $150,000 in for the airport fund. We've also directed, to put in some funding for housing. So we haven't provided the direction to be able to obtain, in my opinion, at least at this point, especially when we look at the challenges of retention of employees. If we're going to be serious about retaining employees and delivering the services, then let's have that discussion about what services we're going to do less of, so that we can achieve what my colleague is suggesting. I'm not saying that we can't. It's just that we've got to be able to provide that clear direction that if we want to do less and still be able to provide those services and provide the staff that the pay that is, and bring our pay system in line with our recommendations to be at least at 50% at minimum. And I would suggest that we want to be better than that, because we don't want, we want to have quality employees and we want to have quality staff be able to deliver quality services.
We'll bring that back at the next meeting as well. And I'm sure we'll have some discussion. All right. Anything else on those 2 items? If not, we'll move on to consideration of revised fund balance policy. Lance or Sam?
No, Sam's going to have all the hard questions on this one. I'll give you we took your feedback at the last meeting, and Sam worked to put together the changes you'll see are really most clearly in the additional appendice that is at the conclusion of the fund balance policy. There's a table outlining the various fund types and account numbers. There's a visual representation of the funds. The only real substantive change, and we put those in an appendice, Sam can explain more why, but it's better to have them not actually in the policy, because the policy goes in the audit and it just becomes a bit more clunky, but I think it's helpful information. In terms of the substantive changes, Sam redlined the administration area of the non-lapsing contingent accounts for your discussion, and I'll be real brief here that I did go and have conversations with each of the department heads that were listed, just to talk through kind of some of the concerns that were expressed and how each department head thought that it might be valuable to have those accounts. And the other piece of information you asked for was for us to give you some general information about use of contingency historically, and how perhaps it would be implicated by these non-lapsing contingency accounts. So Sam did a great job, and she went back to 2007 to try to do some archaeological work to figure out how we've used contingency. And I took an opportunity to look through that. And going back to 2007, really pre-2012, a fair amount of your contingency spending would go to things that I would classify as court operational functions. So going back to 2007, you had legal fees from the clerk of courts, psychological assessments, interpreter fees, jury fees, office supplies, law book updates. So pre-2012, there certainly were the contingency account, the general contingency accounts went more often to those court-related functions. That hasn't been the case, and again, I can talk a little bit about why I think that is. Of course, I wasn't in administration in 2007, but a lot of those utilizations, they're episodic but not annual. So Sam referenced in our conversation earlier today, looked like we had jury costs, about $20,000 in 2007. And I thought back to what happened in 2007. I was in a different department in the courthouse at that time, and I remember we had a very, very large, very expensive jury trial in 2007. So that explains why, when you sequester a jury for a couple of weeks and have all the costs that go with that, that explains the $20,000. So those $20,000 that was spent. Those things don't come around every year, but when they do come around, we don't have a dedicated funding source other than contingency. Thankfully, we haven't had to use that really since 2012, for those accounts. That said, in speaking with the department heads that are referenced here, I can just give you their recitation to me of what value they thought that this would lend. The clerk of courts, again, would be jury cost, interpreter fees, and the district attorney similarly with expert fees and jury costs that come with that. Conservation planning and zoning, again, we talked primarily about the updates of things like that ortho imagery. With respect to the sheriff's office, it's very timely. It's not pleasant, but it's timely that we very recently, earlier this week, Sam, myself, and a number of representatives from the sheriff's office were meeting to talk about upgrades that were needed for equipment that they have, moving to more of that subscription as a service model that I referenced before. And our this cost this year for the two services we were evaluating is about $195,000, and the RFP that was released that came back was $638,000. So not saying that a non-lapsing contingency account solves that problem, it doesn't. But in speaking with the sheriff, again, his thought was that it would be helpful to have. Then lastly, the Veterans Office, and speaking with VSO Galindo, one of the challenges that we've had with the Veterans Service Commission is that we haven't put more money into that fund for a great many years. In fact, I can't remember the last time that, even as the deputy administrator, I don't recall the board putting funding into that, and that account is getting, I believe it's less than $5,000 at this point. So having these accounts, I do think it would be valuable to provide that additional incentive it further incentivizes really good behavior. If I'll pick on veterans. If you're Aaron and you have a vacancy in your small department, but you have a big need for the Veteran Service Commission, that it's like, hey, we need to have some funds roll over into that account. That can't happen without this committee and board approval, but you might withstand that pain. You might put off on some expenses you might otherwise, you might put off some purchases you might otherwise make if you knew that that was going into an account that you could later go to the board and say, hey, this is a thing I need. I've got $10,000 that we didn't spend from our last year's budget. Again, it takes county board approval. I think that can be a stronger incentive to undergo a bit of that operational pain. I do think it also has some value relative to stabilizing, funding stabilization, as Sam wrote in the description there. But of course, these are not required by any GASB rules, any governmental accounting standards. They're not, every county doesn't have them. In speaking with my colleagues, certainly my colleagues from Chippewa County, they have the most robust use of these. They find it helpful, but that certainly doesn't mean we need to do it. But otherwise, Sam, any highlights you wanted to make in the changes or the appendice you put together?
In order to keep kind of the fund balance policy somewhat simplified, I chose to put the charts in the back to kind of lay out those funds so that if we add any, if we subtract any, or if there's a different classification later on, it's easy to change the appendice without having to worry about where it's sitting in the fund balance policy in and of itself. I did break it out in accordance to how you will see them in our financial statements. So if you are looking at the financial statements at any point up in the upper left-hand corner, there's usually governmental funds or proprietary funds. The chart here in the appendix, it further breaks it down, which again, you'll see it's complements the financial statements. You'll see the general fund, you'll see a segregation of special revenue funds, you'll see debt service and capital improvements. When we talk about proprietary funds, you'll see enterprise funds listed as highway and solid waste, and it does say enterprise on there. And then you'll see another category off to the side which says internal service funds, which are those two funds, the employee benefits and property and casualty insurance fund combined. Fiduciary funds or custodial funds, those are monies that we hold just on an agency basis, such as the Sheriff Inmate Trust Fund. That's inmate money that we are the custodian for them. We can't spend it in any way except for as their custodian. And then that last portion there is a major discretely presented component units. That's how it's presented in our financial statements. So North Central Healthcare, Central Wisconsin Airport, and Marathon County Special Education. That's why when you look at the fund column there, it doesn't have anything for North Central Healthcare and Marathon County Special Education because they do their accounting in separate systems that we're not the, it's not in our system, but Central Wisconsin Airport is. Again, there was the visualization, just to kind of put it in a different format. If by all means you want to give directive, if you want both, one, neither. If you want me to go ahead and just put in on the first page of that fund balance, do apologize. I can put the fund balances more clearly defined in there if you so choose.
Okay, questions for Vice Chair Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the administrator. If we do set aside these contingent accounts, do you see the need for the $800,000 that you put at your level reducing to some extent because we have these things covered now?
That's a good question. I think you could certainly do that. That's a question really for the board. In my mind, it's a risk strategy. What are you comfortable with? There are some counties that don't maintain an annual contingency account. They simply, if those things come up, they utilize reserves. I'm not a big fan of that. From in my professional role to advise you, but you certainly could say, based on this, we want to modify our existing allocation for contingency. I think that's entirely reasonable.
Or would you say that the way we do it now, where we give you that full amount, gives us the most flexibility rather than allocating specific departments? I just see this as kind of tying our hands unnecessarily.
Sure, I think I think that's a good point. You can argue both ways. The general allocation you put toward contingency that I shouldn't say simply, it requires the full board to approve. I see the benefit of the departmental contingency accounts really on the incentivization to department heads. I think that's where if you're going to see a benefit, that's where it would be. Again, I don't think it's something that I fully support, taking administration off, because that I do have funds that are for special projects and other things. But if you want to get a department head to not spend money that's budgeted, let them roll it over for a thing that they might see value in purchasing, particularly if the thing is, and I'm not saying Aaron would do this, but it's a good one with the Veteran Service Office. They have a very tiny budget. They have to work hard if they're going to have any rollover, they really need to work hard. They budget very close, and all of our departments budget close. But if you think about it like your kids, right? Like, hey, if you guys don't spend money, we'll pool it and you can split it with your siblings versus, hey, if you don't spend this money, it's yours. It's an approved project. They still would have to take it to the county board to get it, to have the opportunity to use it. So there is protection there, but I think that's where you'd see benefit. And in speaking with the former administrator from Chippewa County, they had a much longer list of departmental non-lapsing funds. Sam and I really pared it back just to see if you liked the concept, but the world is your oyster, as Mike sometimes says. If you want to adopt a broader strategy, you can do that. I think you can go either way. It's just sometimes those things, again, your use of contingency over the last several years has been big capital stuff or bigger projects. You haven't used it to put money into the Veteran Service Commission fund. You haven't needed to, so that's not a value judgment, I don't believe. But some things are really difficult when you weigh them against dipping into contingency. I'm not being articulate, but I hope that gets to your point.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, so the question, I think it can create the right incentive if we have a department that, is looking to possibly set aside some dollars that's currently in operations that they may not need. The question that I guess, and so I think there's value in creating that incentive. The question I have is we're talking, $300,000, $400,000, not quite $400,000, $300 and some thousand dollars, almost $400,000, or $300,000. No, almost $400,000. So the question would be, and I think it's in line with my colleague. You could reduce potentially the other contingency fund from $800,000 to $300,000 or to $500,000. But this creates the incentive, and we don't have to necessarily fund it all at one time. In other words, I guess the question would be to the administrator, would you build a budget with that contingency today immediately, or wait to allow the 2025 budget to play out? And if the department has some extra funding, again, similar to our CIP rollover, this rollover into a fund in 2027 for any unused potential in 2026. Therefore, it would potentially underfund or potentially does reduce rollover into the CIP. So I think there's a benefit, but I'm just looking at timing as to when that would potentially, if we adopt it now, when will we start implementing?
Great question. So we wouldn't, with all these non-lapsing accounts, they aren't a thing you fund, right? They're not funded through the budget. They would be funded
Because of
because of the budget and any amount that is left over. So to your point about when would it make the most sense to make any modification to, I think to Vice Chair Marshall's point, to the overall contingency funding plan, that would be in not the 26 budget, but the 27 budget. You could see how much, I mean, you could try it before you buy it and see how much, does it have the intended impact? And then also, I think it's important, you can always look at those non-lapsing contingent accounts as part of your budget development process. So if you have, let's say the sheriff's office and the jail has hey, they had a really good year in terms of out-of-county housing, held costs together very well. Maybe there's $180,000 in the non-lapsing contingency account and you have other priorities as a board. You could utilize that non-lapsing contingent amount for some need you identified. My hope was to be that would be a shared need. That's something the sheriff aligned with you on, because again, I think that is part of that incentivization that you would get the most leverage out of that. But you can use it both ways. And in either instance, during the year or as part of the budget, of course, the county board has to approve that.
I would ask just in lieu of the time, that let's try to be as succinct as we can be relative to our discussion on these issues, because we've got more than half the agenda to go. So Supervisor Lemmer.
Sorry, I'll try to be fast. Are these capped, or do they just keep rolling over and grow? I think they should be capped if they're not capped.
Capped.
I just want to interject. I really struggle with the creation of this account because we do things for the benefit of the county and we budget for the county. The Sheriff's Department has the highest levy support of any department in about 25 million approximately, give or take, of the levy goes to support that. Ortho imagery is, I think, a capital or budgetable expense that we should be building into our capital plan on a long-term basis and not creating the incentives. The others, that's why we have a contingency. If we have that special jury trial, if we have that special cost, we can dip into it. I really struggle with that because of, as Chair Gibbs said, it impacts our KIP going forward. And it's the good of the county. It's not necessarily the good of the department. It's the priorities of the county that we should be looking to fund. And that's what troubles me with creating these specialized accounts. But I will defer to the committee. What do you want to do with the fund balance? First of all, Sam, thank you for bringing this here. And this is the policy discussion that we need to have and give the guidance to the administration. Any other questions? What are your wishes? Supervisor Hart.
I just have a question on those contingent accounts. Are those being funded when we have fund balance from, are they coming from those individual departments? If those individual departments have fund balance and then it's going into there, or is that general and then it's being filled from all of those?
So we look at it as the actual surplus, or, if they needed to dip into a deficit, but it would be a surplus of their budget, and it'd be based on the actuals, not necessarily the budget.
So, for example, we wouldn't have one department accidentally funding another department's contingency fund. Okay.
Yep.
What are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the fund balance policy and try the non-lapsing contingency accounts understanding that they will not get any funding until the end of 2026, if I'm correct. So there would not be any dollars in those accounts until 2026, and only if those departments have unspent budgeted funds in their accounts would they roll into those accounts at that time. We can try it for a period of time.
I'm looking for a motion.
Okay, the motion is to approve the contingent, or the fund balance policy with those contingent accounts.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Now on the discussion, Chair Gibbs.
Okay, so I think the intent is to try this with the understanding that we're not putting funding and not building a 2026 budget with these dollars in it. These are to create incentive for the departments if they have unspent budgeted accounts or unspent budgeted amounts after the 2026 budget year.
Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Supervisor Lemmer.
So are we then going to decrease the contingency, or is that a second, or is that an amendment? I feel like there's some redundancy if we take that 800,000 and keep it 800,000.
Well, at this
I
point,
think that issue's not before us today.
Okay.
So if you want to do that, it would be something we would do in the context of not as part of this motion. You could have it as part of the earlier motion or discussion, but it's not germane to this motion. Right, Mike? Chair Gibbs.
and I would say we would be able to have that discussion once we start building the 2027 budget. We would have knowledge of what, if any, is going to be rolled over into these accounts, not until
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, and that's why I kind of asked where these funds would come from, because say the district attorney's office doesn't have 10,000 that rolls over from the previous year, then they're not backfilling that, which is kind of why we should see if that even is possible before we even have that discussion of what to do with the contingency fund in the budget. Thank you.
Other discussion? If not, all those in favor of adopting the fund balance policy will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right, let's go on to looking to accelerate our discussions to consideration of potential modifications and facility access and holiday schedule. 1.5 day Fridays and additional holidays. Administrator Leonard.
I'll attempt to go quick. And I'll start with bottom line up front. It's agendized for action today, but I'm not asking you to take action. I hope you talk about this. So I have handed out at each of your locations. Thank you, Supervisor Hart, for handing that down. Just a lot of this is built on the presentation Molly previously gave to you, and I alluded to this before about the importance of our addressing staff retention and attraction. Under your board rules, this is your wheelhouse. You are charged with providing leadership relative, and that leadership is to me relative to our workplace policies. So here are two things that I do want to go through, and I will have a general recommendation at the end, but again, I'm not asking you for taking action today. I hope you have conversation. And please take this information that I also emailed out to you and think about it before your next meeting and ask any questions you might have. So real quickly, what I'm going to give you is, again, an overview of our employee retention, talk about hours of access and our existing holiday schedule, provide some context relative to our peers and other comparable governments on those ideas or on those areas, and then talk about next steps. So when you look at retention and recruitment in our current state, this slide, the third slide in your packet, really gives you in text a lot of the information that Molly gave you previously in her presentation, but I'm going to say things you already know. Our local environment is highly competitive. Our unemployment rate in this region is below the state average, 2.7% compared to 3.03. That might not sound like a lot, but that is a lot when you think about the median in the state is 3.3%. The difference between 2.7 and 3.03 is 10%. So we are 10% more competitive than the state based on average unemployment. If you look at median, it's over 18%. So this is a highly competitive market for talent. In terms of early turnover, again, Molly gave you a lot of really good data at one of your last meetings. We have early turnover. That is a challenge. We have people leaving our organization. About 25% of our turnover is employees with less than a year of experience. That's our regular employees. That's not seasonals. It's our regular employees. Same thing is true when you look at less than 5 years of experience. 50%, more than 50% of our turnover, as I'll show you in a graph later that again was in Molly's presentation, is that early turnover. That is a challenge. I talked about our need to move our wage scale. That's a part of it. This is wages, and this is the workplace policies and environment side of that coin. So length of service, I'll show you a graphical representation on that. We are a less tenured organization than we've been historically. Retention is critical. I think you all know this from your professional lives. The cost of turnover is significant in terms of, there's a generally acceptable metric. Now, it certainly matters based on position, but either half the annual cost to up to 2 times the annual cost for a position is the cost of turnover. That's direct and indirect. So direct, you think about the recruiting costs, the training, potential casual staffing, but also the indirect loss of productivity and knowledge. Chair Robinson previously referenced the National Association of Counties and included at one of your previous meetings a presentation that was given by the National Association of Counties talking about these challenges. We are not unique, as I'll show you later, but where we have opportunity is on these 2 areas. I think public access hours and holiday schedules, those are opportunities for us. Other governments, and certainly the private sector, have made changes. And I think the attractive thing about each of these is that they impact people not only that early turnover piece, but it applies regardless of where you lie in your professional career. It can be a really important tool, I think, to keep people that are tenured within our organization that otherwise might be looking to take a position that is less than full-time or has more flexibility. So wide potential range of benefits. Here's that graph that Molly shared with you. It puts it in, I think, very stark terms. More than 54% of our separations have been with people less than 5 years of service with us. As I referenced before, we'll talk more about that when Milena gets here to talk about our compensation, because that is a part of it, but it's not the entire story. Early turnover has an impact on our ability to deliver services. It's also very, very costly. So our current active population in terms of years of service, again, I referenced tenure. Molly gave you this previously. I just copied and pasted these because she did it better than I did with the text. We have a much younger organization. We are not unique in that. That's a trend in local government, county government. It's across the country. But our average length of service for our regular employees is 8 years. And we have somebody retiring from Molly's department after 45. So she skews that number and we're still at 8. And that's I think a lot of benefit. I don't want to be, the bearer of challenging news, but there's a lot of benefit from new ideas, but it also does pose some challenges. And this, I think, is the most telling piece that, again, it sums up what we all know personally and professionally. People are looking for, and people are constantly looking and evaluating their opportunities. Those opportunities for employment focus around the work environment, work-life balance, flexibility. That's that second to the last bar. and then salary and pay. We're going to talk about with Milena our compensation grid and how we need to make some changes there. And I think there are some real opportunities that we'll be able to present to you that are more effective long-term on the comp side. But these are two things that, as I'll talk about later, bang for your buck in terms of work-life balance and impact on the public, as I'll describe. I think they are, as I'll recommend to you later, I think making changes in these areas has a lot of upside and very, very limited downside. So current state with respect to public hours of access, our general governmental offices, primarily the courthouse and Lakeview campus, are open 8 to 4:30, so 42 and a half hours a week. Our facilities and our departments don't close over lunch. That is somewhat unique. There are other counties, certainly in other municipalities, where if you go during the lunch hour, you see a sign that says closed, we'll be back in a half an hour. Our courthouse doors do open at 7:45 to get people in the building, but departments are not required to be open until 8 o'clock. So of course, we have exceptions to those standard hours. I'm not going to go through them all in detail. That's not going to change regardless of what you do, either today or at a future meeting. We have a lot of our services that we provide that are governed by things outside of what I'm asking you to look at today. So again, airport solid waste, independent, airport is independent, library is independent. Solid waste is driven by the market, not by, we don't want to close at 4:30 and we got to open before 8. So, and it's not going to impact emergency services. So moving quickly through that, what is our experience regarding public access? Simply put, a lot has changed. I would say that even pre-pandemic, a lot of the things we were doing, a lot of really good things to enhance our services to the public, and people were consuming services differently than the standard walk-in and call-in traffic. I listed a couple of things here. CCAP, changing the way electronic filing of documents. Our call center 211 that we contract for is 24/7. Permit applications are all online. You can get documents from Jenny's office. You can request them in your living room, wearing whatever clothes you want at any hour of any day. So there's a lot of things. You can make payments, user fees, buy park passes, all those things 24/7. And the public has taken advantage of that. We have, if you need to get something from the Parks Department, you go online, you can buy that at any time. This, I think, is another very telling area. Public records. Several years ago, it wasn't all that long ago, if people wanted a public record, they'd walk in and request it. We implemented a public records portal a couple of years ago in Marathon County. People can do that at any time, and staff are processing those all day. I had Mike look this morning, I should say this afternoon, how many public records requests we've gotten through to this point in 2025. It's 1,586. So we get a lot more of those. The ease of service for the public has increased our services that we provide. Our county website has more than 100 services on it, the majority of which there's some way for you to get, all of which there's some way for you to get information, and a significant number of which you can actually access them and do substantive work at any time of the day. So how does Marathon County's experience compare to other governments and other entities? Modified hours of access is becoming more and more common, both in the public and private sectors. I encourage you to just, this was eye-opening to me. I just started to do some online research. And in 2019, there was a survey, private sector survey, 55% of organizations across North America offered summer hours. We, of course, do not. There are a lot of organizations that are moving to a 4-day work week. They can do that in multiple ways. A number of them have reduced the hours that people need to work. Work 32, pay for 40. I want to be very clear, I'm not advocating that we do that. There are a lot that do it without a reduction in hours worked. And I'll show you a table here later that's in your packet that a number of those are local governments. And Washington County, if you followed in the Wisconsin Counties Association magazine, has moved a number of their departments to 410s. So won't go through the slide in detail, but there are benefits, employee benefits and employer. So again, you certainly can do the research you want to the level you want. But it was eye-opening to me to see those changes. I'll give you one other piece, anecdotally, our experience with public access. So after we moved to Lakeview, we have a common front entry where we set up a workstation. Well, I took the opportunity on a Friday, non-holiday weekend, or non-holiday week, on that Friday, and I sat at the front, and I was working out there, and I kept track of how many people we had come visit 8 departments in the afternoon on that Friday. 8 departments. ADRC, UW Extension, Conservation Planning and Zoning, Veterans Service Officer, Admin, HR, Finance, and Adult Protective Services. We had 7, 2 of which were a former employee or a former Veteran Service Officer brought her friend because she wanted to see the new Veteran Service Office. So we had 5 people. The public is not accessing our services on Friday afternoon. You want to have a quiet time, you can come to the courthouse on a Friday afternoon and see what happens. So that's not to say no one, and certainly here in the courthouse there, we do have court scheduled at some times that we would, if you wanted to really maximize those changes, we'd have to do that. I just give you that for illustration. The public is accessing services differently. You'll see that when you go out in the public and you try to get some professional services done on a Friday afternoon. I challenge you to find a law office that the lawyer is there on Friday afternoon. But I'll move on. How does our experience compare to other governments across these 3 areas? And I included tables in the packet to kind of lay those out. And I'll start with the full-time less than 40. And again, I'm including this for information, not necessarily I certainly wouldn't advocate to move in this direction. But a number of counties have really moved to having the full-time designation be something less than 40 hours. Some of our neighboring counties, I know Langlade, in speaking with staff from Langlade County, they have a number of different hour designations. Again, not advocating that we would move in that direction, just for context. The second piece that I will talk about is modified access hours. This is the thing that was even more striking to me. I know just in the recruiting that I've done recently, I've had 2 recent positions where someone came from a county or a municipality where they do have half-day Fridays. There are a number of counties and other governments that have made that transition. If you want to ask, Sam can tell you that was one of the first things. She's like, I'm going to miss my half-day Fridays from Lincoln County. It is becoming more and more common. My colleague from Chippewa County, they moved to a half-day Friday approach. I actually had the pleasure of speaking with 2 of their board members about it, and they had nothing but good things to say about that. So I'm including this chart just so you can see there is a movement, more and more organizations, not all by any means. I do not want to overstate that, but I think it's something that we really should look at, and other governments are making that move because it doesn't impact the public to a significant degree. Not saying it doesn't impact the public, I'm saying to a significant degree. And then I'll talk about holiday. How do we compare to our holiday schedule? So our current holiday schedule, I wrote vacation schedule, that should say holiday schedule. For our general employees and non-represented employees, we have 9. Our deputies and detectives in the last contract that was approved by the board, they have 10. How does that compare to other peer governments in terms of, you'll see the list in your slides. Very succinctly put, we are behind. The average of that group that Molly was able to survey is 10.61. The asterisk next to Sheboygan County, they're the ones that, the little note at the bottom that says considering adding one holiday, they're going to vote on that this month. And speaking with their administrator, she has no reason to believe that's not going to pass. So that number is going to change. We need to add a holiday. And I'll talk more about my recommendation overall, kind of with the constellation of hours of public access and holidays. But again, I'm not asking you for action today to implement anything. Why I'm bringing this here is and as I started with, this is entirely your wheelhouse. Your charge under your board rules is that you provide leadership relative to the direction and development of workplace policies. This is that. I am very confident that I can develop a policy that will work very well for our organization. That said, I have to present my work plan and the progress we've made on that tomorrow at executive, and that there's a lot on it. I really would prefer not to spend a lot of time putting together this proposal and working with department heads if you're not interested in approving it and providing direction to me as to what you want. So I can build it. There are a number of ways to build it. If you want me to consider that and move forward with building it, I'm very happy, and I would advise, I think we should do so. We can do that a number of ways. If you go back to the table that I showed, there are a number of governments that essentially maintain their current 8 to 4:30 Monday through Thursday, and then go a half-day Friday. If that's what you want me to do, that's direction, I can do that. There's other approaches. We could do a slight expansion of hours Monday through Thursday, perhaps open at 7:30, and then go to half-day Fridays. Or I think an innovative approach, and Kim can talk more about this, but she's been piloting, as you know, on one night a month when the county board has its meetings, stay open and allow for appointments to come in during that time in the courthouse. That has been received exceedingly well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, but you pretty much fill every one of those spots.
That is correct. We don't stay open, which is something that we could do. We open at 5:30 again when security has opened, but I think we would greatly benefit if we just stayed open from 4:30 straight through, because we often get requests for those 5 o'clock time or 5:15 time slots, because people can just stop right on their way home from work. So I think it would be a tremendous benefit to do that.
So I could build any one of those. But again, I'm looking for direction. If that's what you want me to do, give me that direction and I will do it.
So let me, just in light of the time, what questions do you have, or what additional information do you want as a committee relative to framing the discussion at a future meeting? Supervisor Hart.
I just have one very simple question. In the comparison of other hours with other government bodies, in the notes, it says offer flex. Is that kind of like a similar thing to what the clerk's office does, is offer flexible time periods based on the department?
My understanding from that survey is that, well, unless you want to clarify. Well, why did you do it?
Sure, I think flexibility looks different based on the respondent, but typically it's offering different schedules by different employee. So maintaining hours, but then letting employees flex for coverage.
And I would say there are other municipalities have certain departments are referenced on that chart as well as having different hours. Like
That's right.
a
Supervisor
lot of
Lamar.
counties have highway departments that are different.
I think it'd be helpful too to know, for instance, with holiday, I think a flexible holiday is beneficial, but I'm not 100% sure if departments appreciate that. So it'd be nice to just know if, for instance, if there was an extra holiday, if there's a preferred path for the departments.
Preference between which holiday or how
A
we would?
fixed date versus as an employee, I probably would want the freedom to say, hey, it's my birthday today and I want to take a day off versus, no, everybody gets off on August 10th or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's different opinions there, and we could certainly, if it came to that, seek opinions from others, but a lot of times with the flexible holidays, it's really just adding paid time off, which we have many employees that don't have the opportunity to use the paid time off that they earn. And so, because the work doesn't stop when they're out of the office. So having a fixed holiday does allow the work to kind of slow down or stop and give those employees that don't otherwise have the ability to actually unplug, to unplug. So really, I think the fixed holiday is a better option.
Other questions? I know we're not, this is, not up for a vote. Does anybody have any heartburn with doing additional exploration and bringing a recommendation back for our consideration without a formal commitment? But does anybody have heartburn with moving ahead with the development of a proposal? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just say I agree that if no one's coming to use, or very few people on Friday, that would be a great benefit. I would just not be okay with less than a 40-hour work week.
Great point, and that was one thing I cut. This wouldn't change actually the 40-hour work week. Employees would still be required to work 40 hours. It would just be opportunity, quite honestly, for us to catch up on the work that doesn't stop for the rest, but you're spot on.
Other questions? If not, I think you've got some guidance relative to the questions, and if we could bring something back relative to both the holidays, the work week days, and then I think you just answered the work week hours at 40. So if you could bring something back. Thank you. All right, we will move on to consider adding the condenser replacement at AHU 13 to the 2025 KIP with funding from the county contingency, which is what we have. Who's going to take the lead on that?
I can tee it up, and then Troy can answer the hard questions. There's a memo in your packet on page 79. In short, if we move this project up, we save $100,000. It's on the 5-year capital plan. Chris's memo, again, is on page 79. The funding source, a suggested funding source could be the contingency fund, but if you have other thoughts, let us know. But it strikes me as a good opportunity. It's based on law changes and equipment modifications that are required and a change in coolant. So if we get it done before the change in coolant requirements go into effect, you can save $100,000.
What is the driving factor behind the change in the coolant? Is it environmental, health and safety, other?
The driving force really is just that. It's a change of the R22 refrigerant at the end of the year to one that uses propane, and then none of these air handlers are equipped to handle, so we'd have to replace the air handler and the condenser, as opposed to just working with the condenser this year.
Supervisor Lemmer.
I had to look up propane, and it said it's very good for the environment, I guess, comparatively, but it also talked about safety, different safety standards. So are there other things that have to come with this to get ready with that, as far as the safety side, that would cost money, or no?
No, essentially it's just replacing the condenser. That's right with this, and Chris's memo details it out very straightforward, not really needing to beleaguer it. We save that money now. That air condenser is running fine, but we need to change it before this, or we spend another extra $100,000.
Any other questions? If not, what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to recommend to the full board to fund this project in the 2025 contingent, or out of 2025 contingency, and amend the 2025 CIP plan.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. We'll move on quickly to the transfer of parcel ownership from the city of Wausau to Marathon County, southwest corner of Marathon Park. Administrator Leonard?
Yeah, I apologize. I brought the experts, Preston and Rob are here to answer questions. This isn't in your packet, but I put up on the screen. There's a picture of a small sliver of a parcel that is north of the highway department that lives within Marathon Park. But it turns out, despite the fact that everyone has acted like Marathon County has owned this for, I don't know, since like the late 1800s to present, Preston and Rob in their evaluation found that actually, no, the city of Wausau still owns it. So the question before you is, do you want to leave the ownership as is, despite the fact that Jamie and her team have been working in that area and maintain it, and there's a fence that wraps around it? Or do you want to ask the city of Wausau to formally convey that parcel to us, as I believe they thought they did back in the 20s? Anything I missed, or anything you want to clarify?
If anybody does want additional information, I do have like little packets that I took out of the one email where I explained what was going on. So if anybody's interested, I do have more information on that.
Any questions or discussion? If not, what are your wishes? The question is directing staff to begin discussions with the city of Wausau relative to transfer of the property. Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion that we direct staff to question or request the city of Wausau to transfer the potential property, since the county has been utilizing it and maintaining it forever.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Moving on to request for consent to use PFA for taxable conduit financing. This was put on at the last minute with the thoughts that we begin the discussion today and not take action until our next meeting, but it's a time-sensitive issue, which is why it was added, and I conferred with Vice Chair Marshall relative to the placement, given the lateness of the issue coming before us, so.
Simply put, as was said, it's a request to use PFA, so they need the potential borrower, BBL Kresge. Project is envisioned for both Wausau, Rothschild. Of course, each of those lie within Marathon County. All three need to provide consent for financing to be afforded under Public Finance Authority rules. At a high level, the project is summarized. It's purchasing some property and renovating those properties in those municipalities. I did just at 3:46 today, I had requested previously a greater explanation of what was going to be happening with the project. And I can read quickly. The project will collectively add value to the following items: increase property tax revenue to both sites located in Rothschild and the city of Wausau, add sales tax revenue at the local and county level, and stimulate job creation, for there will be hired companies to complete the renovations and the additional tenants being signed, and will bring additional jobs and sales tax income, and new services offered on site will come with the hiring additional staff needed. So happy to, I don't have much more information. I got this request, as Chair Robinson referenced, late last week. I can ask for more information if you want it, but essentially it doesn't impact the county's borrowing capacity, as is referenced in here. It doesn't obligate the county to anything, would not be liable for principal and interest payments. Nothing on the bonds that would be issued would bear any legend or language identifying them as county bonds.
So are there any questions? Again, we'd look for additional clarification as to the project description. I think that they gave the benefits of it versus the description of it. It would be nice to get additional clarification between now and that meeting as to what the project entails, understanding that we're not at risk, but they're accessing the tax exempt, I think the lower interest rates through PFA.
These are taxable.
I'm sorry,
They're taxable.
taxable. These are taxable, yeah. Any other questions? So if we get that additional information, it will have to be acted on at the next meeting and at the July board meeting in order for them to secure. They're hoping to get the borrowing done in early September from a timing perspective. Any other requests? Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, seeing that we're not, financially responsible, we're not, bound by anything, but I do think that we need, a little bit more clarity on the project. I'd make a motion to move forward this consideration to the full board.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Poole. Again, I think that both Vice Chair Marshall and I thought, again, we'd introduce the topic today, see if there were questions. I don't know that I'm comfortable, given the information, on voting for it today. I think we were looking for that clarification. Vice Chair Marshall.
I think when we would vote yes to move it to the board, there's an assumption by other board members that we approve of it, and I agree with Chair Robinson. I would like to know more about what the project is before voting. So I guess I can't support it until we have more information.
Can I read the rest of the email?
Chair Gibbs.
I don't disagree. I think we can get that additional information. I think this will give the opportunity to put it on the board's agenda for discussion and clarification as to what the project is. So that's why I was moving it to the full board, for them to consider and provide that clarification information at the educational meeting.
Administrator Leonard.
Thank you. I can read the rest of the email. I don't know that it's going to have the detail you want, but at least then I can give that feedback to them. It reads, a portion of the funds will be used to purchase stabilized, value-add, multi-use development made up of 5 assets, 8 parcels in downtown Wausau. The property consists of almost an entire city block and is immediately adjacent to the former mall site, which is now being redeveloped after a long wait. Buildings are made up of residential, multifamily, retail, small office. Renovations being done, the addition of new retail tenants have been signed, along with the addition of 9 new multifamily units in one of the buildings within the project. The remaining funds will be used for the refinancing and redevelopment of an existing Banter Grand Hotel Water Park in Rothschild, with a rebranding to Banter DoubleTree by Hilton, a 139-room hotel, convert the water park into a large site convention center, renovate multiple units, and continue to offer a full-service gym and catering service.
Any questions? I think that provides additional clarification. What are your, Supervisor Lemmer?
So we have to approve, and so does Wausau, and so does Rothschild. Does the project go on if one of them objects?
I think the project may go on.
Project,
but
and the funding.
Funding would
The
be through
PFA wouldn't be able to be utilized for any project outside of the municipality that said no.
And is this going to Wausau right now, where they're, I just feel like when I saw this, I didn't realize Washington Square was up for sale. And now it is. I hope Wausau knows that I hope there's been enough conversation, I guess, is what I would like to say. But that's a Wausau thing, maybe, I don't know. I don't know how you feel about it, I guess. It seems a conversation should be had.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Revenue, we're very quickly, revenue from tax deed sales. This was put on at my request.
Yes. So every year when we set the levy, we recognize the levy revenue in the year that we're collecting it. So 2025's levy has already been recognized as a revenue. Anything that's not collected goes on the balance sheet as accounts receivable. So when we sell a property, or take a tax deed property, we put it on as a tax deed, as another asset. What we can collect on is any costs that are associated with it, thanks to Act 216 and 206. Act 216 was from 2021, Act 207 was from 2023, that put the boundaries around what we can keep or retain from the sale of a tax deed. So we can keep the original face value of the taxes. We can keep the interest and penalties that were outstanding at the time that we took it, and then staff time that was associated with it, and any maintenance to the property. So if you had to get new locks, maybe you had to do some sort of construction on it, all of that is an allowable cost that you can then recoup when you sell it. So if you have a property that we have $20,000 worth of expenditures and there's $50,000 worth of profit, or it's sold for $50,000, that $30,000, we are then required to find the prior owner. We have, depending on the time of when we took it and when we sold it, but the most current is we have to try and find them for a year. If we can't, then it has to go through the unclaimed funds process. Unclaimed funds means that the treasurer takes it, deposits it, posts it out there. Someone can claim it for up to 10 years. If they don't claim it, then it becomes ours, but it is deposited into the general revenue or general fund revenues, and then it sits out there as a liability in that time frame. Now, when we receipt it, it's going to probably look in tax deed profits or revenues, which I believe is in the county clerk's budget. So even though it's most likely what we're recognizing is already been put on the books, so we don't really have an extra funding. We just are collecting on a receivable that's out there.
So again,
Yep.
so we buy the tax roll, so we book it as a receivable.
At face value.
And then at face value, and then we incur additional costs associated with buying the tax roll from others. So we have principal and interest associated with that. Where is that tracked, or is that at the end when we recoup our cost? So we're basically taking a receivable and we're turning it into cash. So we haven't impacted the balance sheet, if you will, from the county. But what about the principal and interest?
So the penalty and interest?
Or penalty and
Okay.
penalty and interest.
We can do it one of two ways. We can go ahead and record it in penalty and interest revenue accounts, or we can put it in the tax deed revenue, because it might be a collective of multiple things in there. Like I said, if it was staff time, if it was maintenance was doing work on it, those types of things. The easy button is to put it in the tax deed revenue. Again, that sits in the county clerk's budget, but what you would see is if that $30,000, $20,000 from the prior example, if 15,000 of that was the face value, that's going to wipe it off of the balance sheet. So you'll only see 5,000 in revenue in the tax deed account.
So go ahead, Supervisor Marshall, or Vice Chair.
So we don't incur, or we don't put a receivable for the interest and the penalties as they mount over the years? And why is that? Why won't we do that?
It's not material. So if we do the calculation, it can be put on there. But chances are if it's when people pay on their property taxes, that's when we're recording the interest, revenue and penalty in that year that we collected it.
And one quick
And we don't
follow-up.
always collect the we don't always collect all of what we are owed.
Right, and that's another thing that I was going to say. Have we ever sold a property and not covered the principal, interest, and penalties?
Short answer, yes, most of the time.
And who does those reconciliations? Say a property owner comes and says, well, I think you owe me money. What's the process that we have to document all that? So
That's relatively new, as Sam said. The short explanation of all of this is if you were thinking we were going to have a whole lot of new revenue to spend, that answer is no. But back in the day, before Act 206 and 216, if there was a surplus, we would be able to retain it. We can't do that anymore. So the only way this works out for us, best case scenario ever would be we would cover all of our costs, which is not real. We are going to lose on this to the point you just made.
So the better, if we can make agreements with the owners to come up with a payment policy that is more favorable probably to us than going through tax deed, is that correct?
Well, I don't know about payment plans, but certainly getting the backlog wiped out so that people are only 2-3 years delinquent as opposed to 10. Because by the time they get to 10, all of the equity is wiped out, and not only for them, but also our ability to cover our costs is gone. So short answer, yes, act quicker, and that's the goal.
Any other questions for Sam? All right, thank you. Register of Deeds update. If you could grab a microphone.
For our second quarter report, we've been helping CPZ cover the reception desk at Lakeview campus on Thursdays. We're currently pilot testing new reports for our software vendor and giving them good feedback to correct some issues they're having. In June, I became the Wisconsin Register of Deeds Association Chair for District 4. I'm currently helping research the tax delinquent properties with Rhea and Aaron. We are working on getting our condo plat track index on Landshark. And in the second quarter, we recorded 4,839 documents, and we processed 1,524 vital record applications.
Okay. Any questions? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, update on state and federal budgets will be quick. I provided you with material from both from the Counties Association, National Association of Counties, and the Governor's Office. And I think that there's still some uncertainty as to some of the ramifications of those provisions. But the good news is that there was the County Conservation Staffing Grants was approved with per the county's request, 100% for the first position, 70% for the second, and 50% for the third. They did fund the routine maintenance agreements relative to the state highways that the counties administer at $30 million. The general transportation aid went up 3% each year. The local road improvement program has $100 million, and the agricultural rural improvement program, $150 million, with a $30 million set aside for small 6 to 20 foot bridges. Veteran service offices got a 5% increase. One of the top priorities of the Counties Association was the funding for the courts and the support services. The request was for $70 million. We've got $20 million of GPR. There's a commitment to introducing a fees bill to make up some of the difference. There was funding for 43 DAs. Unfortunately, Marathon County was not one of those. The income maintenance is a 2% increase per year for funding. That may be something we'll want to look at. There was $360 million put in for childcare, for the childcare industry, including $110 million for direct payments. And the UW funding was, they put in $100 million to strengthen the system and stabilize the system. with the thoughts that that might prevent additional closures of some of the campuses. I think as importantly of what's in the budget, what's not. There was no resolution on the PFAS issue, and there's separate legislation. Wisconsin Fund was removed. There was no funding for broadband. The register of deeds recording fees was not addressed, and the stewardship was not funded, but there's work on separate legislation for that. The feds, on the federal level, we talked a little bit about that. They did protect municipal bonds, tax exempt status, which is a good thing for us. They delayed the nursing home staffing rule, which will impact potentially North Central Healthcare. There's low income tax credits for housing, but the big changes are in the SNAP, the supplemental nutrition program, where we get into eligibility criteria, expanding work requirements and eligibility for them, and tying reimbursement into the state air rate and increasing the states and counties' share of funding for the work requirements. Again, went to 64 from 54. And Medicaid eligibility work requirements were also expanded to 64 in 2027 with an 80-hour per month work requirement or volunteer requirement. Those were the highlights of them, but I would look for the Social Services Department to provide us input as to what the impacts might be beyond next year relative to the increased administrative burden associated with implementing that. And again, Wisconsin is one of 10 states where counties administer the program versus the states. So that's a very high level, but as we learn more, we'll share more, but that was what was available through those organizations. Any questions? If not, an update on the property acquisition and planning process for potential highway shop relocation. Administrator Leonard and then probably Troy.
Yep. So happy to report we've closed on all the parcels that the county board directed us to close on. That happened last week, I believe, was the last parcel. So that's a positive development. The next step is we are releasing a request for proposal. Troy and his team put that together for the potential relocation as it relates to design services only. And why we wanted to give you this update is that is to help the board understand the total cost for that facility. Design is that first step, and Troy can explain for you how schematic design, which is the first piece we are going out for RFP for, that would take place first, but it's for all design services and why that's important. And this is consistent with the way we did the Forensic Science Center. It's because you don't want to have one designer for one piece and then go out and do an RFP for another one, because you end up having each architect has, well, I wouldn't have done that, I'll do it differently, and it ends up costing you a lot more money. And it's slower. So Troy put together that RFP being released next week. We don't have funding for that, a clear funding identified, so it will require a budget amendment. We're just telling you that's the next step. We made the same presentation at infrastructure this morning. And if you have any questions about how schematic design differs from design development or construction document development, Troy is here to answer all those. But there's a memo in your packet on page 86, last page.
Make a request that in our design, and when we're looking at hiring someone, that we ensure that there is an evaluation of energy-saving technologies and devices associated with it, because the operation cost of a facility over its lifetime are significant, so that I would hope that we would look and incorporate those requirements into any design package going forward.
That's a great point, Chair Robinson. We have that written right into the RFP, that the statement of services includes sustainability evaluation. So that is included through the whole process, specifically starting with the schematic design, which will go out for next week.
Just,
Supervisor
thank you,
Poole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment, too. I think we want to make sure we don't overbuild on this. There tends to be a tendency sometimes for developers to build as big as they want. We obviously want what's, I think, or at least my opinion, we want what we need to task, but we definitely don't want to be overbuilt on this highway department. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Troy? Thank you for your patience. All right, that will take us to the next meeting and future agenda items. I think we've got a pretty full agenda for the 22nd relative to items that we've pushed off relative to budget assumptions, priorities, and the other items. And we will have Baker Tilly here to talk through the audit. So I imagine it will be a longer meeting again. So thank you for your patience and perseverance. Anything else you'd like to see taken up at that time? All right, if not, item 8. Moved by Chair Gibbs, seconded by Vice Chair Marshall to adjourn. All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. We are adjourned.